The deer and tick management plan that will soon be coming before the council for a vote, hopefully adopted by the council and then implemented by the administration. With us today to speak on behalf of the committee, we have Greg Lowe, Tom Quinn, and Christina Farrar. So to give people some context, as a representative on the east side, I had a lot of constituents call me, let me know that they were concerned about the overpopulation of the deer. Over the last year, but particularly over the last few months, we did a lot of research about this problem to see whether the data held out the concerns of the constituents, and indeed the data more than confirmed the concerns of our constituents, and we felt that action was necessary to take. So over the last few months, we've had this committee developing a strategy, developing a plan, and we're going to have some information on it today, and then some questions from my fellow councilors if there are any additional concerns before we take this to a vote. So first one to speak will be Greg Lowe.
Good afternoon already, Councilor and council members. Greg Lowe, Chief Policy Officer for the city. Thank you for the opportunity to review with you the work of the advisory group and the proposed plan moving forward. Did I get that right? Was it still too far away?
Closer, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Councilor.
Yep.
As you indicated, this has been a long-standing issue in the city, in several neighborhoods in the city. Goes back to many neighborhood groups over time gathering to try to undertake efforts to address the tick and deer population. And during that time, as progress hasn't moved forward, the population of both has magnified and only become a more significant problem for the city. The convergence of deer and tick populations expanding together is the fundamental problem and what the group is attempting to address. The mayor in April appointed an advisory group, a tick and deer management advisory group, which has been working over the past 8 weeks on the recommendations that it submitted to the council last week. The group is comprised of residents of the east side and west side, residents of the city who have gathered on a total of 8 times over the past 2 months, consulted with multiple experts, listened to other members of the community, conducted 2 public meetings, and had visits from advocacy organizations that shared facts and information with the group. The members of the advisory group are Chris Fox, Ken Garno, Susan Greenman, Emily Lawson Hatch, Kelly McDermott Wise, Dr. Joel Potash, Tom Quinn, and Christina Farrar, who are here. Christina Farrar serving from Cornell Cooperative Extension of Onondaga County and advising the group and acting as facilitator with CCE's experience. Importantly, the group has completed a public process that has involved, as I noted, multiple meetings, including also attending TNTs to gather information. And what you're going to hear about next, Tom Quinn is going to tell you a little bit more about the process that the group used and the information sources that it drew on. And then Christina will cover the recommendations that have been made in the management plan submitted to the council. It is an integrated plan, a 10-point plan with a heavy focus on community education, public involvement, and other activities, including the recommendation of a cull beginning in the fall of 2019. Tom, I turn it over to you.
Great.
Thank you, Greg. Councilors, thank you for having us this morning. There are multiple government and academic studies that we consulted in the preparation of this report. When you look at the report, check out the bibliography. It's really quite extensive. We reviewed it. If I had to call your attention to any one thing, look at the report of Cornell University in its 12-year experimental and pragmatic approach to this problem. In general, we have 3 main observations. Deer vehicle collisions pose an increasing danger to public safety. The deer are the principal hosts of adult ticks. The ticks get infected from mice, but deer are the principal hosts of adult ticks. And they pose a problem, therefore, to public health by the ticks transmission of Lyme disease and 5 other infectious agents. The extensive deer population also harms city landscapes. It harms neighborhood yards. It harms urban woodlands and our parks. It contributes to soil erosion, stream turbidity, and it fosters the invasion of non-native species. This is a highlight of some of our findings at a very high level. Onondaga County has one of the highest concentrations of deer in New York State. Deer vehicle collisions statewide number 70,000 and account for $460 million in damage annually. Deer contribute to the spread of disease by accelerating the growth of the tick population. The Lyme disease is the most common vector, vector-borne disease in New York State. It's endemic in Onondaga County. You'll look online, it'll say there are 4,500 or 5,000 cases reported in the most recent year. It's probably, or 400 or 500 cases. It's probably underreported by a factor of 10. Lyme and other tick-carried disease can be a challenge to medical professionals and to health departments. The symptoms are ambiguous. People don't know they have it. Sometimes it's misdiagnosed or missed because it looks like other diseases. There's no direct test for it. You have to test for the antibodies, which only appear at a point after the infection in a person. So you don't, if you find the antibodies, you don't know if it's a new infection or an old one necessarily. Left untreated, it is easily treated if caught early. Left untreated, the symptoms can be chronic and severe. A study at SUNY ESF showed that Lyme disease was present in 14% of tick nymphs and in just over 50% of adult ticks. That was a study in Onondaga County, and about half of those sites were in the city of Syracuse. Ticks become infected, as I mentioned a moment ago, when they feed on mice and other small animals. But as large animals, the deer are the principal host for the ticks. They provide a blood meal at the time that the ticks are in their reproductive cycle, and an adult tick, after feeding on a deer, can lay about 2,000 eggs. So they really accelerate the tick population. According to a study conducted on the Syracuse east side, there are about 50 deer per square mile. There's no firm number of what should be the target, but at Cornell, they're looking for something 14 or lower. Reducing the numbers of deer can reduce the numbers of ticks. The collapse of a tick population, however, will not occur until deer are fewer than 10 per square mile, which is really quite a high threshold to achieve. In 12 years, they haven't achieved that threshold in Cornell yet. Without natural predators, and with ready access to neighborhood gardens and city parks, a deer can live 12 or even 20 years, unless killed by a car. A female deer can have 2 or more offspring a year, and unchecked, a deer population can double every 3 years. So if you're going to reduce the deer population, it's a pretty significant cull that you're looking to achieve. Tick and deer management in our plan is not a quick fix. The experts have said don't look for this as a year or two episode. This has to be a multi-year project. As Dr. Underwood said in a meeting recently, this problem occurred in the city of Syracuse over 30 years. It's not going to be cleared up in 3. There's another problem with the deer population besides vehicle accidents and Lyme disease, and that is the damage to the ecosystems, which I've mentioned. So the problem of tick and deer overpopulation is interrelated. It's complex. It doesn't lend itself to a simple solution or a short-term solution. And that's why our plan recommends work on several fronts. The advisory group has recommended reducing the deer herd through culling working to control the number of ticks, and managing landscape changes using individual precautions and landscaping changes. I'm going to turn it over to Christina for the specific recommendations that we make.
Thank you, Tom. The advisory group considered multiple methods for controlling the tick and deer populations and for reducing residents' exposure to ticks. We've enumerated these in the recommendations. In general, there are a number of things that individuals can do to reduce their risk of tick exposure. These are personal safeguards as well as landscape changes. We also looked at various non-lethal and lethal ways of controlling or reducing the deer population. Some are not feasible because of regulations or because they are not suited for large open geography such as Syracuse with its mix of urban and suburban areas. The advisory group says that residents have an opportunity and even a responsibility for organizing their landscapes to protect children and pets and to take personal safeguards. In this regard, the city should help educate citizens to the precautions they can take. We are fortunate to have Cornell Cooperative Extension to help us with workshops and training, both through city meetings and the city school district. We have many available resources, such as Dr. Curtis from Cornell, Dr. Underwood from the U.S. Geological Survey, Dr. Fierke from SUNY ESF, Justin Gansowski from the USDA, Courtney Lemire from New York State DEC. All have been unselfish with their time in assisting with the plan. We will be relying on their expertise as we move forward. Here's a summary of the advisory group's recommendations. It is a long-term management plan. Tick and deer overpopulation is a complex problem. It's developed over many years, and it affects public health, public safety, and quality of life in the city. A solution will not be achieved in a few years. Starting a tick and deer management program requires a commitment by the city and its citizens for the long term. The plan uses an integrated management approach and an adaptive management process. This is important because we're not proposing one solution now and suggesting that we stick with that solution forward without considering the impacts that it's having. A tick and deer program should encompass integrated management. That is, the ability to use a variety of tools to achieve better control of the tick and deer populations. It should assess the effectiveness of the management operations annually and make adjustments as necessary. The plan relies upon cooperation and support. Effective deer and tick management requires informed and supportive citizens, the cooperation of city and county governments, and effective coordination among city departments such as Parks and Recreation and the Police Department. Community education is a critical part of the recommendations. It is necessary to help city residents understand the personal actions they can take to reduce their exposure to tick-borne infections. We recommend community input and transparency. A standing advisory committee will help the city provide transparency for tick and deer management. It will facilitate resident input and support adaptive changes to the management program as the circumstances change. The advisory group recommends culling. After examining both lethal and non-lethal methods, the advisory group recommends that the city initiate culling of the deer herd starting in the fall of 2019. Trained and experienced sharpshooters are essential for reducing deer density in significant enough numbers for a potential impact on the tick population, reducing the incidence of motor vehicle accidents, and beginning the recovery of urban woodlands and neighborhood flora. An effective culling program must employ special tools for safety and must be minimally intrusive on public and private properties. The advisory group also recommends other methods of control. Although culling is recommended, other lethal and non-lethal control methods may be useful in specific situations. They should be considered within the adaptive management process. Non-lethal methods, such as fertility control, could be combined with culling where circumstances permit. This effort is going to involve public and private cooperation. The tick and deer management program will be most successful if it includes a mix of public and private properties, a mix of public action, culling, and private behavior change, landscaping, and personal safeguards. Residents can support the program by authorizing use of their own properties where circumstances warrant and where appropriate, and by supporting their neighbors who do so. All venison should go to the food bank. We recommend using the meat produced by culling to support our food bank activities in Onondaga County. Finally, we must measure our impacts to know how we're doing. Although this is complicated and sometimes difficult to measure, the effectiveness of tick and deer population management will be assessed by quantitative and qualitative tools over the long term. This will require the active involvement of municipal departments, neighborhood residents, as well as CCE Onondaga County, the New York State DEC, and the USDA. That is the summary of recommendations of our management plan, and we'd be happy to respond to your questions.
Great. Thank you all so much for your work on this. I just want to say the diligence and hard work put in by all the volunteers who worked on this committee was just absolutely mind-blowing how hard people were working on this. As we said, 8 meetings that we had, and the public meetings, there was just a ton of work put in. So at this point, I'd like to offer the floor to my fellow councilors. If you had any questions of the committee, any of the details, please feel free.
So the use of private property, what would that process look like? Would there be outreach? Would you opt in? How does that work?
So there would be outreach. Of course, we have to be in compliance with all state and local laws, so there are very specific setback distances that would need to be followed in order for a property to even be considered. We have had several residents already step up and offer their property for consideration. We will be doing some outreach and also following up with people that have already reached out. Of course, nothing would happen without the education and permission of the landowner. We would first look at that property online on a map to see if the size of the parcel might be, would fit the state and local laws for setback distances, and then it would be ground truthed by a member of the USDA team and a member of our Parks Department, who are the point people, to make sure that even though the numbers might work, that it is a safe place to operate. And then we would seek permission from the landowner.
And then the other part of outreach, telling people that there's going to be people with guns in their neighborhood. I can just imagine if they weren't aware of what's going on, that could cause panic. Like, so were people going to be dressed in a way that would make it clear who they are and what they're doing, and what would the outreach look like for that part of it?
So I think it's important to note that there will be media releases talking about the operations that will be happening. All of the operations happen at night, and we are considering in public places where this is occurring, putting up some signage that says there's an operation happening here. And also, we work very closely with the Syracuse Police Department. So in addition to coordinating with Our professionals, the police department will be a close partner. They'll be aware of where work is happening in the city, so that if there's any questions on the nights of operation, they'll be able to provide accurate and up-to-date information to residents.
Councilor Thompson, any questions? You can grab that one if you want.
Thank you, and thank you for the work that you've done. Two questions. One is relative to what we were just speaking about here. When are there specific seasons when this is going to be done, or is this open? Is this going to be done 12 months a year? That would be the first part, and I would suggest that somehow if this were to go into effect, that neighborhoods, as Councilor Green was speaking about, have notification either through some sort of phone call triage that goes out, or somebody dropping pamphlets off in the area just saying that this is going on in your neighborhood, so people would be cognizant of it. But I guess my first question is relative to timing. When does this go on? Is it in the fall, the summer,
It's generally fall and winter. The season for culling can be a bit broader in the city of Syracuse because there's no hunting in the city. Ordinarily, the culling period is outside the hunting season. It's a tricky thing about notification. Obviously, property owners and adjacent properties need to know. The more attention you start to call, the more difficulty you might have. And we were counseled by other areas that do this, that you can actually create positive interference with the operation if it's too broadly known. And people can put themselves in danger, maybe inadvertently, maybe recklessly. So I think it's important to say that these are trained professionals who have more than 20 years experience doing this without incident. They do it all over the state. When they ground truth an area, they make sure that it is safe, line of sight, always shooting into a berm or into the earth. They use electronic devices for surveillance, so even if somebody were inadvertently to be in the park where they shouldn't be at that point, they're aware of it, they take precautions. So this is a very professional enterprise. Noise suppressors are used. Carcasses are removed immediately by sleds. It takes place at night. It's it's as carefully done as possible.
Okay, and the second one leads into that then, the indemnification. They're indemnified by the municipality. Is that is how it's done now, or?
Yes, and USDA Wildlife Services is self-insured as well. So should there be, in the unlikely event of property damage, homeowners could file under the tort law.
Okay. And who is that you said?
USDA Wildlife Services.
Thank you.
Councilor Rudd, at large.
I know we have $75,000 for the deer plan this year. What's the cost anticipated in the long run? Is it going to be $75,000 recurring? Will it change? How many? And then how many? Talk about the first culling action would be this fall. How many? Is there a target number of deer that we plan to cull this fall? And how does that number change over time?
I'll let Christina handle the second question. I'll cover the first, which is regarding the budget. As you know, the council did approve an authorization of up to $75,000 in the 2020 budget. Those dollars will be reimbursed by the county. The budget for this year's efforts has not yet been determined, but it will be within that $75,000 budget. The exact amount will be determined as the process of ground truthing and selecting sites is determined. The budget will also then be related, I think, in some degree to the second question you had about potential numbers.
Right, so how many deer will we be targeting? That was your question, right, Tim? So we generally, the answer is it depends on how many sites we have, and we generally don't set goals based on the number of the take. We really are evaluating by impacts achieved. So depending on how many sites we are able to bring online this year and operate successfully, that will determine how much the operation will cost and how many deer we'll be able to take. So the more sites, the more deer. We have such deer pressure in the city. We are in no way ever going to decimate the deer population here. What we will be doing in the spring and throughout the early part of the summer of 2020 is seeking to evaluate our success based on a variety of different metrics, quantitative and qualitative. So we will be talking to neighbors who are living in the areas where the culls have been happening to find out how what their experience is. Do they still have deer living in their backyard? Did they have fawns born in their backyard this year? What their vegetation is like. We will do some tick population work to see how the tick population is progressing and some vegetation assessment in some of our open areas. We're very interested in how this work is going to positively impact regeneration in our woodlands and green spaces. So we won't be setting a goal for the number of deer. It will depend on how many operational places that we are able to bring online.
Okay, that's probably fine, but I would just push a little bit because I can understand the constraint of the $75,000 and the need to do multi-pronged approach, but there's also pretty clear numbers around it. Like he's saying you have to get below 14 per square mile, and then below 10 per square mile, or whatever the other threshold was for ticks to go down. And then I would assume that we have an estimate of the number now and the number of deer that we'd have to get under. So we got to cull this many, and then there's their own rate of reproduction. So it does feel to me that there should be a number of over the next 7 years, we have to cull this many this year, this many next year, this many the next year. And it might not be I don't want to be prude about it. I mean, we're going to take action and do it. So do we have that scenario lined up?
Well, I think it would be important perhaps to hear from a wildlife biologist who can address that a little bit better than I can. And I wonder if Paul Curtis from Cornell University, Paul, would you mind coming up and
I would add,
addressing that question about, would you do that?
I don't know how the cost of culling works. Like if you end up paying per cull, or if you end up paying for a site, and you might get more depending on the site.
I think the Cornell,
it seems like
your experience over the years of reducing the population to a certain number would help inform this answer.
I'm Paul Curtis. I'm a professor of wildlife science at Cornell University. I've been involved with deer management issues for 30 years, both in and around the Cornell campus and throughout the northeastern United States. One thing that's a real challenge when you have an open deer population, by that I mean you've got open areas around where deer can immigrate in. And that's always the big question, what's the immigration rate? Because you can do predictions based on the population age and sex structure that says you need to take so many animals per year and set goals. But what's always confounded things in the past, we don't know what the immigration rate is and how many deer are going to move in from surrounding areas. Unfortunately, on campus, we've got a 2 square mile core area that we're really concerned about with student densities and building densities, and the immigration rates really overcome a lot of the efforts that we put forward. At one point we had 95% of our deer sterilized, and in addition we had a controlled hunting program around campus on Cornell lands, and over 6 years we took an additional 700 deer under our normal Cornell hunting program and had zero effect on the core campus population because deer immigrated in and overwhelmed what we were doing. So we don't know what that rate is at this point. So we set goals. Access to deer is absolutely critical. You've got to have enough sufficient sites to be able to try to get ahead of the fawn curve. We've got a current project, research project up at Fort Drum in the cantonment area right now. We actually have population projections and good numbers on actual deer abundance on 8,000 acre cantonment area. And last year, between USDA's work and the controlled hunting program, they took about roughly 350 deer off the herd. That was last year's fawn production. They haven't cut into the stock at all yet. So it's, it's when you start talking about large area, thousands of acres, you're talking about hundreds of deer. It's hard to set an exact goal without the population age structure.
So is part of the problem that statewide you wouldn't agree to the same number of deer population per square mile? Like it would be okay to have 20 per square mile in a more rural area, or is that part? Because it seems like there should be like a state coalition then, or even more regionally in the Northeast, where you do the same exact math.
It's up to the individual community what your goals are, and the goal population level depends on the goal you have. If the goal is reducing deer vehicle accidents, sometimes you can cut the population in half, meet your objective. If the goal is plant regeneration, you get down to that 14, 15 deer per square mile threshold. There's a lot of literature that shows if you can get abundance down to about this threshold under normal plant growing conditions, you should see a response. And then the old literature on ticks shows, again, about that 10 per square mile threshold. And if you get deer densities down below that, black-legged tick populations tend to crash. So there's some targets to shoot for, but getting there is extremely difficult.
Councilor, if I could just make 2 points to address your question. One was around the area of whether or not the budget is sufficient to accomplish the task, and I want to be clear that we have every expectation that the first-year budget is sufficient to accomplish a first-year effort of the multiple steps that we want to undertake in addition to the cull activities. Second is regarding your point on measurement. The 10th recommendation of the committee is impact measurement, and it's specifically stipulated that while this issue of measurement is difficult, it must be undertaken on an ongoing basis over the long term, and we envision through a combination of efforts with our own Parks Department, which will be involved in supervising this work, neighbors, the CCE, the DEC, and the USDA Wildlife Service, that we will have a program of measurement and tracking.
So is the year 2, year 3 cost 50,000, 75,000, 150,000, 500,000? Like, do we have a guesstimate of what it should?
After the first year.
I don't think we do yet,
guys are
Councilor, but we do have the continued commitment from the county to continue to be involved in helping the city address this issue.
The point was made that this maybe should be a region-wide effort. And one of the things the advisory group did is it met with representatives of the village of Fayetteville and the town of DeWitt, who have already each started to undertake this. And they indicated we should stay in touch because we have common boundaries or we have common migration areas, and there may be synergies that can come from a larger area that is coordinated. So I think this is all the issue for an adaptive plan as we move forward. We'll be learning at the same time, and the coordination with other municipalities and through the county is going to be very important.
Thank you.
I've got one more question. It was just brought up about sterilization. Is it in this particular program at this time?
It's not being implemented this year, but we felt it was important to leave it in the plan to be considered in the future. We have such a high population in the city right now. We need to get the population under control, and we would consider sterilization and other non-lethal methods in the future as we evaluate our progress.
Okay, I fully understand that and the reasoning for it, but can you maybe just speak a little bit? You said at one point you had 95% of the deer around the campus, the 2-mile campus, sterilized, and you still had such a large increase. So is that a viable or is that a successful method?
Sterilization has its place, and it's useful in very small areas, particularly where you've got like a confined herd, and either an island herd or a fenced herd where you don't have the immigration to deal with. What we saw with our open population, again, deer move in from city of Ithaca, from village of Cuga Heights, from village of Trumansburg north of us, and from village of town of Dryden to the east of us. And with those deer influx again, we were seeing between 14 and 20 new deer appearing without ear tags every year. And so it was a constant battle just to try to recatch those new deer coming in, sterilize the female deer, try to avoid the bucks because they're not going to help you at all. So you really got to target those female deer if you're going to have any impact at all. So it's because of that, all we did was sterilization, was stabilize the herd. We didn't reduce it because of the influx each year and the additional work.
Thank you. That answers mine. Yeah.
Any other councilors' questions? Councilor Green, Councilor Thompson?
I just have a concluding point when you're ready, if that's okay.
Yeah, I believe everyone feels satisfied. Shout out to DeWitt Town Councilor Karen Rigney in the back. DeWitt's here in the house with us. When we talk about working regionally, Karen and I have stayed in touch on this one from the beginning. So, yeah, I think...
Before you spike the ball yourself, I would just say, like, having pulled ticks off myself and my wife and my 7-year-old, and not yet him, but probably, and we just have to do something. Yeah, we have to do something. The sooner the better. So thank you for the work.
Yep. So yeah, Greg, if you'd like to say some concluding
In addition
words.
to just expressing another round of thanks to the advisory group for all of its efforts over the past several months, as you can see, I think, and in looking at the report, you're going to see a rigorous, fact-based approach that is well supported by science and public input, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to move that forward on the timetable for activities throughout the rest of this year and in the fall. I also just want to make note of a few city departments that have been very actively involved. I want to thank the Parks Department, which I've noted will be actively involved in helping to implement the program. Our Law Department, which has been critically involved in making sure that the procedural steps here are followed, and the Police Department is here today and has been a part of the process and will continue to be. And I just wanted to recognize those groups today. And the many experts, many of whom are here today, who contributed to the work today. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to thank, as Greg said, all those partners. Thank you all very much. And at many times in the room, we've had the council, the administration, the county, the state, and the federal government all working on this issue. So it takes a lot of people coordinating, working together to get to the finish line with this. So for all our partners, and also a shout out to Councilor Nader Maroon, who pushed us forward for so many years, working diligently on it. A lot of the work was done by the time we got there, so thanks to him for pushing us along so much.
And Councilor, you're too modest, but Councilor Driscoll has been a critical participant in all of the process, and I want to make sure we recognize that. Been a part of every single meeting and has cooperated in trying to help solve the problem.
Yep. Thank you. Appreciate it. So thanks to all our partners. Thanks to everyone for coming out. And thanks for our fellow councilors for all your good questions, and look forward to adopting this plan sometime soon.